That's when Moses. That's when how long Moses lived. I'm sorry.
When he was that old, my teeth will wear out.
Okay. All right. So I thought what we would do today is we would review a little bit of last time, because I think it's important for us. It's been a couple of weeks. Review and then continue until we get to a good stopping point. Unlike the sections we've seen before, I think that we've kind of gone on tangents. We've sort of had questions, and then we went over here, went over there, whatever. I think today what we're going to find is a little bit more traditional Gemara, in the sense that we're going to find a thing, we're going to make a bunch of arguments about it, we're going to see what happens when we put these arguments against each other, and work from there. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. All right, so we're going to be on 259, which is on 4a. We're going to kind of go back and review where we were right in the middle, which is where this little sign is. You have it there? Okay. And so we read basically these three paragraphs, and then let's review that first. So, hello, Dee. Does someone want to start reading? There you go, Dee. Okay. Does someone want to start reading? We'll just start reading in the English.
The Mishnah teaches, and the first of Nisan is also the new year for the order of the festivals. Gemara asks, is the new year for the festivals really on the first of Nisan? Isn't it on the 15th of Nisan, the first day of the festival of Passover? Rabbi said, what the Mishnah means is that the festival that occurs in the month of Nisan is the new year for festivals.
Okay. So, just again, this is mostly review. You see where we are?
Right there.
Yeah, exactly. So, it starts off by talking about, referencing the original Mishnah, which was 2 pages previous, all about the list of all the New Years. And so it says, right, the first of Nisan is the New Year for the festivals, which we knew, according to the Mishnah, right? And then the question is whether or not that actually is on the 1st or on the 15th of that month, the month of Nisan, which has Passover in it. And what the Mishnah, what Rav Chisa says is the Mishnah is just telling us that the new year is in that month, but it's not really being specific. Right? That's what Rav Chisa is telling us. We're going to get this question doesn't get answered for quite some time, so I don't want to lose track. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but we'll come back to it. Okay, so part of the question is how are we counting the first month of the year? And why is that important? Or right, why is counting at this time relevant in terms of festivals? Does anybody, before looking, does anyone remember from last 3 or 4 weeks ago?
You're talking about when things are taxed?
Right, we sort of, right? Something with the temple, if you remember that. That's where the taxing kind of came in.
When your promises and your oaths and your vows
Exactly. So it's about vows. Exactly. Right, so this is about vows and oaths, and often those things have monetary value, right, in the context of a temple. So often what will happen is you will consecrate money or objects to the temple, and then that no longer belongs to you, it belongs to the temple. And so the question becomes, once I've made this vow, how long do I have? Right? Taxes are due April 15th. How long do I really have?
The 17th, which is this week, like now.
Oh, right.
That's why my brain was there. It's mailed.
So let's pick up in the Gemara. There's the second paragraph. Go for it, Dee.
The Gemara comment: the ruling makes a practical difference to one who makes a vow, in order to determine whether he is liable for violating the prohibition. We shall not delay.
Right. So pause. Right. So this question about whether or not it is the 1st or the 15th, whether it is the 1st of the month or the holiday of Passover, right, is relevant. There is a practical difference for the one who makes a vow, right? Because that person may or may not encounter the prohibition, you shall not delay. right? Did we really spend any time with "You shall not delay" last time? A little bit, right? So the idea being is the Torah tells us that we shouldn't delay on things that we've promised, right? This comes up in a different context about paying people on time, things like that. So, right, thank you notes too. We did talk about that too. We did. Right. All right, keep going.
And the Mishnah was taught in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, as it is taught in the Baraita. Whether one makes a vow to bring an offering to the temple, or consecrate an item to the temple, or makes a valuation, promising to pay the value of a particular person to the temple treasury. Once 3 festivals have passed from the day, and he has not fulfilled his promise, he transgresses the prohibition. You shall not delay, as stated in the verse. When you shall vow a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay paying it.
Great. So this is where this is probably the most important thing that we need to note for all the later discussions, which is this whole, right, we have this vow, we've made for ourselves an obligation about bringing something to the temple, right? We've made this agreement with God, I'm going to do X. And the question is, how many festivals do I have? We talked about this at length last time. Here it says, once 3 festivals have passed. So what are some of the options, if we just look at that leaves us?
What festivals are they referring to? Are they
the pilgrimage festival. So let's name them so we're clear. Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Okay. So it says, once 3 festivals have passed from that day, then there's the transgression. So what are the various options that we can understand that to mean?
Well, you have a given amount of time, so it doesn't have to be paid immediately. If you look at the 3 festivals, the time apart between Shavuot and Pesach.
Depending on when you start
Got
your
it.
years, when you can start your 3 festivals.
Right. Anything else?
Well, I mean, at one level, they're defining what does delay mean. Because, I mean, you could look at the verse in Torah and say, oh, you shall not delay means as soon as you make the vow, you have to make the offering, right? But what if you're in Tiberias, right? And it's going to take you at least several days to travel to Jerusalem, at the very least. So, plus you may make a vow for the future, right? And saying, if I've got a good, crop next year, I'll bring this offering. So, that idea of what does delay mean is being refined in a way that's practical, right? To make it easier for the people to follow it so that they don't simply ignore the prohibition altogether.
Right, so this block of time in some sense gives us permission to make it work for our schedule. Great. So I think another piece is, right, and the whole conversation is when do we start counting and when do we finish counting, right? So is that 3 festivals from the day you meant the vow, right? So if I make the vow today, is it 3 festivals, Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuot? Last time we talked about, right, it has to start with Pesach, which is the conversation we're going to get into, right? And then it's festivals, right? It could, right, there's a bunch of different options, right? It could be.
So,
Yeah.
the temple doesn't exist today. And it didn't exist when this was written.
Correct.
I'm not sure what the relevance is for today's world. So when we make a vow, we could make an open-ended vow. I vow to give
That's our pledges.
I vow to give $18 to the congregation of Beth Shalom. We could give a close-ended vow. I vow to give $18 to Beth Shalom
And Dill will say
before
when.
Yom Kippur starts. But, I don't know that anything here is really relevant to that.
It's actually, I think that your question about relevance is actually even deeper. because what we mean by a vow is different now than it was then. Right? Because back then you had the temple, the whole idea of enforcement of a vow was you had to bring an offering if you violated the vow. Right? So the idea of all these categories of vows and oaths, etc., had a particular legal meaning here that may or may not persist.
So
It
yes,
does
I
persist.
sense that
It does
that
persist.
the word vow is used here in a more narrow way than we use it. It's like restricted to temple offering.
And if you don't pay your church bill on time, you have interest on it, and you're indirectly, that's a vow. You have committed to do that.
So wait a second. I think it's
So
important.
it is relevant today.
So I think there are the reasons why this is relevant and ways that are clearly not relevant, right? The answer is yes. I'm a both and kind of person. And so one is yes, the temple did not exist then and certainly does not exist now. And so part of this is, hey, do you want to join us?
So it's an attempt to remember.
So I don't think it's more. Do you mind if I squeeze this in here?
Right ahead.
So I think.
Attempt to remember what the customs were.
So I think it's more than just an attempt to remember. I think that. So I think two pieces. One is understanding what a vow means to us, and what does an obligation look like. This is for you. We just read the first two paragraphs here. So, excuse me, we're streaming this on Facebook Live so that people can join us through the internets. You're good?
You need the tripod.
I know I need a tripod.
Did you ever see them?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we have like a.
I was trying my best for this not to be invasive, but I clearly failed at that job. That's okay. I think the content is more important than the face that it's on. So I think two things. One is that I think that while the temple and that context is no longer relevant, in the sense that there is no temple and there wasn't then, I think that there is value in. I think most things like this have values embedded in it, and they need to be drawn out. So even though so I think even though that the temple was destroyed, and that's part of the context, I do think the idea that there is this centralized place where where our promises are being measured in some sense, it has value to us. So that's one thing. The truth is that I think that most of the time that the temple is not relevant to us, and I think that as a metaphor, it serves much more use than anything else. The second thing I think about oaths and vows here is that our terms for vows are not the same as when we use them in English. Right? English has a lot more words than Hebrew does, and context makes a difference. So here, they're talking about like an agreement you have made with the divine to give something up of your own for divine purpose.
Are we talking about a neder or shvua?
Well, I think we're talking about a neder.
Yeah, because there is a difference. No.
Right. That's
Tomorrow
true.
back on that?
It does, but not here.
Okay, all right.
But I'm pretty confident. So this is talking about hekdesh. So that means when I've consecrated something to the
It's
temple.
also neder.
Right. So yeah, hanoder and hamakdish.
Right.
So we're talking about someone who's really given something up. Right. I have this cow at my house, and it literally ceases to be owned by me the moment I'm giving it. So I think the scale of that is really different, right? As opposed to, I'm going to make a donation, right? Or, on Yom Kippur, we're going to have these tabs in the show where people can fold over their donations, right? That's a very different kind of promise than I think that this is.
And again, I think that idea that this is an obligation to God, and that any interest or penalties would have to go to the temple, right, is significant when we talk about what it means today.
Which I think is also why you see a lot of institutions, Jewish institutions, who are called Temple X, right? Because they're saying, and you can speak to this better than I can.
Because, the idea of the Reform movement was that we don't have a temple, we're not interested in rebuilding the temple, the places we worship now are our temples.
Right. So,
The last point
Yeah.
also is that we don't have any legal mechanisms today to annul a vow. So if you were to make a vow and not fulfill it, you would be in a perpetual state of sin before God. Right? You could not atone for that under the prohibition.
But we have a time for the Dharma.
No. You mean Kol Nidre?
Yeah, before Kol Nidre, the Minhag and Ashkenaz, Erev Rosh Hashanah, is through a Beth Din, you do Hatar Kadan.
No, the consensus of rabbis for at least the last 1,000 years is that we do not have the legal expertise to properly do that.
Is that like a 51% consensus?
No.
99% consensus?
99%.
Well,
If you look
among
at,
all branches
right,
of
for
Judaism?
example, even with Holy Dre, right, there was one Gaon, right, over the course of however many hundreds of years we're talking. There was one Gaon who said that Holy Dre was sufficient. All the others.
most rabbis are not fans. Correct.
That's all it is.
Right.
They are different.
Right. So I think a piece to this, right, especially contextually, since tomorrow is Kol Nidre,
Right.
is to recognize where this is and isn't relevant, in the sense that perhaps when we use this word more fluidly and we say, I have made an oath or a vow, how is that not being absolved, right? And how is it actually being, absolved of me? And that balance between the two in the modern age. So that's a place where I would say that's relevant.
I find the concept of not being able to annul the vow fascinating. No legal mechanism.
I mean, there was
to annul a vow.
back then, right? In the Mishnah or the Talmud, there were mechanisms.
But suppose the circumstances that led up to the vow changed.
So there is a whole tractate on vows, right? And so that's not what this one's about. So I don't want to get pulled off too far, but I think perhaps that might be something we can spend some time on. I'll bring in some resources, and we can do a whole thing on the different kinds of vows. Is that okay?
Yeah, but there's another diversion.
In the meantime, keep your money in your pocket.
There's very little money in my pocket right now. My next stop may be a bank job.
Okay, so we still haven't. We're still doing review. So the question we were talking about was, when does the year start? And once I've made a vow, which is where the start of the year is relevant, is according to the Gemara, is so I would know how long I have before I've transgressed the prohibition of you shall not delay. Okay?
Yes.
All right. Will you read this third paragraph for me in English?
Okay, so this is going on the Nidarim?
Yes. Specifically about how long we have before we've transgressed you shall not delay.
Okay. So, Shimon Omer of Shimon says, that one transgresses the prohibition against delaying not when any 3 festivals are passed, but rather when 3 festivals are passed in their proper order, i.e., according to the famous Mishnah of Rosh Hashanah, right?
Right, that's the one we're talking about.
Right,
Yeah.
Okay. Going on that Mishnah, with Passover first, and so too, therefore. So Shimon ben Yochai would say, is that what he would say, the festival?
Right, so Rabbi Shimon would say, right, that 3 festivals have to go in their proper order. Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot.
Right.
He would also say, right, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, someone else, would say,
the festivals that must pass before a person is liable for violating the prohibition against delaying are sometimes 3, sometimes 4, and sometimes 5.
Right.
The Gemara asks, how so? How is it like that? If one made his vow before Passover, there are 3. As he may delay bringing his offering until the festival of Sukkot. If he made his vow before Shavuot, there are 5. As the counting of 3 festivals begins only from the next Passover, and if he made his vow before the festival of Sukkot, then there are 4.
Okay, we talked about this at some length yesterday. So, or not yesterday, a couple of weeks ago. So, let's just walk. If you make your vow after Sukkot, the three festivals you have are then Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot in order. If you make it before right? That's the same basically from the end of Sukkot to the beginning of Passover. If you make it after Passover, you have Shavuot, Sukkot, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. You have 5, right? Because you have to have all 3 in order. If you do it after Shavuot, you have Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot. Is everybody with me so far?
So basically, Pesach is really considered the first.
Correct. Right? It's the first.
Concerning the door.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. That's the context here. Everybody with me?
Yes, I'm with you. But
Yes.
we're taking this and we're discussing it in minute detail.
Yes.
And the context,
We're going to get more minute in a
the
moment.
context of why this was important 2,000 years ago and at that time and why it would be important today is probably in the Talmud someplace, but it's not here. So it's like it's a hypothetical, and therefore it's gonna stick in my brain less than if we knew why.
So I think here's a piece of this, and this is true with all Jewish text. I think most things in general, which is meaning making is a partnered process. It requires the thing that you're encountering, whether it be a person or a book or a text or whatever experience, and you, right? So even if, let's say, this is incredibly meaningful for me, it may not be meaningful for you, and vice versa, right? You are the one who's going to create its meaning and its relevance. Like, you are going to decide, right, whether or not, hey, this is going to be immediately relevant for me or not. Okay. All right. Turn the page. We're on 260. So I'm going to read it in the Aramaic, and then Joe, you're going to read it in English. And you can see we're about to switch from 4a to 4b. So Tanu Rabbanan, Chayavei Hadamin, Ba'arachim, Hacharamin, Hekdashot, Chataot, Ba'ashamot, Olot, Ushlamim, Tzedakot U'Ma'asrot, Bechor U'Ma'aser, U'Pesach. All right. Tanu Rabbanan is an introduction, as we know, to the text that's about to come, which is a Baraita, which is an early rabbinic text on par with the Mishnah. Go for it.
The sages taught in the Baraita, with regard to those who are liable for vows of monetary payment, or for vows of valuations, or for dedications, or for consecrations, sin offerings, guilt offerings, burnt offerings, peace offerings, vows of charity, tithes, firstborn offerings, animal tithes, or the Paschal offering.
Okay, so this is going to start. We're going to jump down in a second to the paragraph below where it's on 4b. This is a list of different types of offerings that I might, right, become liable for if I vow out. Okay, leket shichcha ufea kevan she'avru alehen shlosha regalim over beval ta'acher. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Shlosha Regalim Kesidran, Bechag Hamatzot Techila. So, right, we're listing off all of these different types of offerings. Keep going. And for gleanings.
Or for gleaning, forgotten sheaves, or produce at the corner of the field. 3 obligatory agricultural gifts that must be given to the poor. Once 3 festivals have passed, they transgress the prohibition. You shall not be late, Rabbi Shimon says. These 3 festivals must be in their proper order, with the festival of Passover first.
Okay. So before, it is surprisingly clear for Talmud, right? Crystal clear.
Like it's from Pam, we don't do that.
Well, we don't do most of these because we don't have the temple.
Though.
Right. So we do have versions of these things today, right? They're not exactly the same. So we have a list of all these offerings, and if you look into the notes, you can actually learn a whole lot more about each individual offering and its context. We're not going to spend too much time with that. So each one of these, what did we learn that was new from what we had just reviewed? What do we know now that we didn't know before 5 minutes ago?
We have a list of what we might call vows or obligations in the English language.
Right? So we have now specificity that we didn't have before. We had this general context. Hey, this is going to be relevant for the person who makes these valuations or whatever.
So now, presumably, we could use this list to. These tractates have been incredibly backwards leaning. But now we have some specifics, and presumably, if we wanted to, we can use these specifics to look for applications in the common world.
Right. We are building a rubric here, in some sense, right? If you hit any of these dynamics, then you have obligations that come from that, right? Exactly right. I think that...
Interesting, it's a brisa, not a mishnah. And a lot of times the mishnah, I've been learning from Mishnah and brachas, you find that the mishnah is clear in its language. It tends to itemize sometimes to make the mishnah clear, right? Like in brachas, these are the tefillot and so on. Here it's a brisa, which is similar to a mishnah.
Right.
So the Gemara tends to be a bit more cryptic.
Right.
So it's something that works.
So I think that we're starting to see those layers of the Talmud on top of each other, right? Specificity here that we may not have seen. Whose opinion is it? Are all of these liabilities according to?
Shimon.
It's not Rabbi Shimon.
Sages.
It's the sages. Exactly right, Dee. Right? So the sages, right here at the top, right? Rabbanan. So that means when the sages are speaking in one voice like this, it means that is most likely the majority opinion. Right? So this is like if everybody voted, this is what the vote was. Right? Not attributed to a specific person, but to the group as a whole.
And it's also not giving us a counter opinion, which suggests also that this was pretty much the consensus. And
right. We're about to get a bunch of counters.
If
You're getting it in the next paragraph.
But
from the Mishnah or from the Gemara?
It'll be Gemara, but quoting rabbis from the Mishnah. But I think your point is well made, right? Which is, right, in general, this seems to be the consensus. And even if we have all these minority opinions, we know that when the sages say X, we can rely on that for the most part. Right? And we can see here all that the rabbis say is once 3 festivals have passed. Rabbi Shimon brings that specificity in their proper order. Right? With Passover first. Right? That's 2 different conditions that come with that. Okay. Paula, I think it's your turn. I'm going to read it in unless someone wants to try reading it in Aramaic. Go for it. And then you'll read it in English.
Rabbi Meir Omer, כיוון שעבר עליהן רגל אחד עובר בבל תאר. רבי אליעזר בן יעקב אומר, כיוון שעברו עליהן 2 רגלים עובר בבל תאר. רבי אלעזר בן רבי שמעון אומר, כיוון שעבר עליהן חג הסוכות עובר עליהן בבל תאר.
Okay, I just want to point out a word. It's a Hebrew word. Actually, I want to point out that all of this so far is in Hebrew, which tells us that it's on the earlier side of things, right? Versus Aramaic, which would be later.
Well, Rabbi Meir is...
Right, these rabbis are all rabbis from the Mishnah. So if your Hebrew is still on the growing side, the word Omer means says. And you can see that this is a rabbi says blank. Rabbi says blank. Rabbi says blank. Right? All right, why don't you read it in English for us, Paul?
Rabbi Meir says, once even one festival has passed, one transgresses the prohibition. You shall not delay. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, once 2 festivals have passed, one transgresses the prohibition. You shall not delay. Rabbi Eliezer, son of Rabbi Shimon, says, once the festival of Sukkot has passed, one transgresses the prohibition. You shall not delay. So they're all
right.
in different places.
Right, sorry, so we have a lot of different answers here about when this transgression gets implemented, right? We now have a total of 5 positions. What are they? Total possible answers, what are they?
but it's before which holiday, wherever you're starting, that you've got to go through them in order.
Well, so that's not exactly what. So
One of the
one of the opinions of the rabbis is three festivals in order, starting whenever. That's one. That's the rabbi's
Sorry,
position.
what, Pesach?
No, that's Rabbi Shimon's. Right. So the rabbis themselves are saying 3 in order, starting whenever. Right. It doesn't specify.
No, because in the Baraita, right, the rabbis say 3 festivals.
In order.
No, Rabbi Shimon says
Right.
in order.
You're correct. So 3 festivals is one position. You're absolutely right. Rabbi Shimon says in order, starting with Passover. That's a second option. What's the third? Rabbi Meir.
He said
Even if one festival.
One festival. Second.
And it's not Dafka? It's not. It's,
Well, that's as far as we've
I
gotten.
mean, we don't know if it's Dafka Pesach or.
It doesn't say.
At
Not
this
yet.
point, it seems
At
like
this
that.
point, we don't know. Right? So then the fourth option is what? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov.
2 festivals.
2 festivals. And then lastly, Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, which is interesting, right? After Sukkot, which is a lot of specificity, right? So we now have 5 options about where this vow is going to land.
Although if we go back to the
Yeah.
second to last paragraph on the previous page, Rabbi Shimon actually states 3 festivals without specifying in order. So Rabbi Shimon is actually stating
He's drifting a little, right? Or we didn't get specificity yet, right?
Maybe it's a different Shimon.
Also could be a different Rabbi Shimon, absolutely.
I'm thinking there's a lot of emphasis on transgression here, which suggests to me that perhaps there was quite a bit of transgression going on at the time.
I believe that that's probably true.
Yeah.
I mean, rule.
It's changed, right?
Right. Well, I mean, we'll just back up for a moment and talk about what does it mean for us to pay our debts on time, right? That could be, in this case, it's the temple, but it could be to another person, right? The timeliness of our promises, I think, are matter, right? There's your relevancy, and the question becomes: at what point do we transgress? Do we cross the boundary from I haven't fulfilled my promise yet versus fulfilling it?
Yeah. You'd be able to say this, that maybe if according to the Manzo Amra that says it's any yontif, if you will, and not Gufa Pesach, maybe that's being stricter, being more conservative, because that way it shows that it's like doesn't make a difference what it is. Whatever it is,
Right.
I mean, that may be
Sooner rather than
Right.
later. Exactly right.
It's possible you can analyze it that way.
Absolutely. We're seeing a whole spectrum. If we want to put it in the spectrum of lenient to stringent, right? Rabbi Meir would be much more on the stringent side. Absolutely.
Well, I think this concept of being able to fulfill it is very different back then, right? Because you had to travel to Jerusalem, right? And yes, everybody's supposed to go for each of the 3 regalim, but that didn't necessarily happen, right? Whereas, if I owe Joe some money, right, in the course of my daily errands and travels, I can stop by your house and give you a check, right? It's much easier nowadays to do that, but back then it was much harder.
The concept of picking a rabbi is following, I want to follow this rabbi.
Well, and that's why you have the consensus of majority opinion, and the idea that the majority opinion is the one that's binding.
So back then, it's unlikely that someone would have made a vow to an organization that was 1,000 miles away. So,
I mean, look,
So
actually,
there were telemarketers beginning in the 2nd century.
because look, even in the time of the
Josephus brings down.
in the time of the Second Temple, there's still a large community in Babylonia, right? Which again, if you're in the land, it's much more feasible to say, okay, I'll get up to Jerusalem for Pesach and Sukkot. But if you're in Babylonia, that's a much longer, much more difficult trip. And I think that's also one of the reasons why in the Mishnah and Gemara as well, it's this balance between the rabbis being prescriptive and descriptive. But in some cases, the rabbis are saying, here's what Torah says, and here's the rules you need to follow. And in some cases, they're observing what's the kind of common practice and describing that, because they don't want to make it too difficult, because they want people to follow the law, even if it's not exactly how they might want it to be in an ideal world.
So I want to pose this question, right? We have now these 5 positions, right? Why would some of those positions be, like, what would be some of the reasoning behind some of them, right? So you offered, right, Rabbi Meir, who's going to be on the stringent side, one holiday, right? He maybe wants people to be really careful with their vows, right? He might say, don't do this unless you know that you can fulfill it. What other reasoning could we have?
And also because what he's saying is, okay, what's the next opportunity when you're going to be in Jerusalem? It's the next festival. If you don't go on that next festival, you've delayed.
Right, so what other options are there? Shana Tova. What other options are there? What other reasonings can you come up with?
Well, if you're donating something
Yeah.
that involves crops, you're going to have to schedule it for when your crops are harvested.
Sure.
Let me
If I only have barley, I can only do it at a certain time of the year, right?
Pickable and pick your holiday and you make your fast.
Exactly right.
let me call up a modern
Now
analogy.
they have to be big enough to go to.
So about 10 years ago, I had an income tax question. I wasn't sure if tax on something was appropriate or not. So I called up the IRS. I spoke to an agent, and I got an answer. And I asked for a reference to the tax code. I read it, and I still had questions. So I called up again, and I spoke to another IRS agent.
And they gave you
I got another answer, and I got a reference to another section of the tax code, and I read that also. And I decided,
Sounds like you've been studying Talmud for quite some time. Go on.
I decided they were in conflict, so I called up a third time, and I got a third answer and a third reference. My decision was to do what I thought was in my best interest. No, there's no reason that the temple, in its various iterations, was up there for hundreds of years, if not longer. And it's not clear to me that the tax code never changed. The temple's tax code did change. I'll put money on it. My maximum bill is a quarter.
Right, no vows, right, at this time.
So it's possible that there's a good reason why it's not clear, because it changed over time.
Right. So I think it's an important distinction, which is I think that's a nice example in the sense that even if the IRS, using your example, the laws didn't change in the third time you were making the 3 phone calls. You reached 3 individuals who presumably had authority to give you 3 different answers based on their own knowledge, their own experience, their own context, whatever. I think that's exactly the kind of thing we're seeing here, right? Rabbi Meir has a different life experience than Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. He's going to give a different answer based on what's important to him.
Not only that,
Right.
looking at the people, because when you look at your congregation, for lack of a better word, knowing that some people have a distance to travel, making it broader than somebody who lives nearby and can fulfill it,
Right.
the promises here. So I think it's like choosing the one that fits your congregation rather than.
Right.
And look, even today there are some rabbis who are more stringent, right? And if you're not willing to be that stringent, then go find another rabbi. And there are some rabbis who are more lenient and more open to, a variety of practices, or recognizing that people aren't always going to be that stringent, but still welcoming them into that community.
But I said
The
before,
point is,
choosing the rabbi.
Judaism never was black and white, and it still isn't.
Correct.
And it never will be.
Correct. All right, let's read one more paragraph. So we're on page 261. We are in the third paragraph of 4b. My Tama did Tana Kama. So my Tama is an important phrase we should learn. Do you need a pen, by the way? Do you want a pen?
I have.
Okay. My Tama means what is the reason? You'll see it a lot. This will be not the first time nor the last time we will see my Tama. And then Tanakama is a really important phrase as well. The Tanakama is, right, so the rabbis of the Mishnah are known as Tanas. that the term for that generation of rabbi is a Tana. And so the Tana Kama means the first Tana. So what is the reason that the first person is saying? Like, what's the first person's reasoning? Michde minehu salik lamali lemehedar umichtav b'chag hamatzot b'chag hashvuot b'chag hasukot shma mina leval ta'acher. So the second phrase I want to point out to you, or the third phrase I want to point out to you, is at the end. It says shma mina. Shma means what? What? To hear. In certain contexts, it also has the meaning of to understand. And mina means from it. So learn from this, whatever the next sentence phrase is, right? So what is the reason of the first Tana? And it gave an answer, and then learn from this some sort of conclusion, right? Without even knowing any of the other words, right? We're starting to see kind of an outline of what this is going to say. What else do we notice about this? What language is this in? I know it's written in Hebrew letters, but did it sound like Hebrew?
It's Aramaic.
It's in Aramaic, which tells us what?
That was later.
And it was later, exactly right. So we've moved from earlier sources to now later sources. And we're going to start to see how these layers are on top of one another, explaining one another.
And I think
Yeah.
there's one other thing about the phrase Tanakama, right? It's sometimes anonymous, right? So when you have a named opinion, right? I'm just, in the next paragraph, it refers specifically to Rabbi Shimon. When you have a named opinion, it's going to name the rabbi. Why did Rabbi Shimon say this? When it says Tanakama, it's referring to these anonymous opinions.
Right.
And if we go back to...
And who is our anonymous opinion right now?
Well, this is going back
Right?
to...
The sages. We're exactly right.
Right, so this
Right.
is going back to page 259 where it says 3 festivals.
Right. Exactly. That whole paragraph, right? Exactly right. Okay. You read in English? You did? Keep reading. Read another paragraph.
The Gemara proceeds to explain the various opinions. What is the rationale of the first Tana? Since the entire chapter has just concluded a discussion of the 3 pilgrimage festivals, why, after stating 3 times a year shall all your males appear before the Lord your God, do I need the Torah to write again on the festival of Passover and on the festival of Shavuot and on the festival of Sukkot?
All right. Yeah, sorry, keep going.
And they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed.
All right, let's stop there for a second. Let's just understand the question. Okay, so we ask, what is the rationale of the first Tana, right, of the sages here? So then we learn chapter 16 from Deuteronomy is all about the 3 pilgrimage festivals. Okay? That's what the Gemara is telling us. And I looked it up before I came, and it is in fact all about the 3 pilgrimage festivals. And then it says, 3 times a year shall all your males appear before the Lord your God. If I just have that information, what does that tell me?
They have to make the pilgrimage 3 times a year.
Correct.
They can't choose. They just
Correct.
have to be there.
So 3 times, right, the 3 festivals we need to be at there. Then the Torah says again, and this is the question, do I need the Torah to write again on the festival of Passover, on the festival of Shavuot, and on the festival of Sukkot? Right? What is the question being asked here?
It's repetitive.
What? It's being repetitive, right?
Elokei Abraham, Elokei Yitzchak.
Right. So we're seeing some repetition, and the rabbis will see always this kind of repetition as giving us new information, right? There's no reason for the Torah to tell us something twice.
Reinforcement to make sure we're paying attention.
So I don't think the rabbis see it that way, but that's certainly one answer. Absolutely.
You can't forget it when you keep hearing it over and over again.
Exactly right.
I mean business, this is it.
So, I don't know why the camera switched. Hopefully it goes back, right? Uh-oh. There, I think it did something funky. I don't know why it did that. So hopefully the camera's not all wonky. All right, so it tells us new information. Read the last sentence.
Rather, learn from here that the verse comes to teach with regard to the halakha of you shall not delay, that does not transgress the prohibition unless these 3 festivals have passed.
Right. So, what did we learn?
The reinforcement needs to shouldn't delay.
Let's talk about the 3 festivals.
right?
We're going back to what we first back to.
It's being really, really specific here, right? It's saying when the Torah is telling these 2 verses back to back, or really this one verse, these 2 things, it's telling us specifically. If the 3 holiday festivals get passed, you've transgressed. That's the right. That's our proof, right? You ask the reasoning, the proof. That's our proof. How do we feel about it? Does that feel definitive to you guys?
It explains that opinion.
Right.
But we know we've got 4 other
We do.
opinions.
We certainly do. Let's take a quick look at time. So let's look at one more, and then we'll pause from there. We'll pick up after the holidays with the other reasoning. All right, keep going. Howie, why don't you read the Aramaic and then also the English?
רבי שמעון אומר, אינו צריך לומר בחג הסוכות שבו דיבר הכתוב, למה נאמר לומר שזה אחרון. And Rabbi Shimon, who said that one does not transgress the prohibition against delaying unless these 3 festivals have passed in order, says in explanation of his opinion, it was not necessary for the verse to say again, on the festival of Sukkot, of which the immediately preceding text was speaking. Why then is it stated? It is to teach this must be the last one. The 3 festivals must pass in order, so Sukkot is the last of the 3.
You know what? Meaning Sukkot could have been figured out without mentioning it?
Well,
Right.
That idea?
So I think that, yeah, go for
But
it.
I think in both cases they're saying, okay, there is repetition. You appear 3 times a year, it should be obvious that it means Pesach or Sukkot. In the first case, the anonymous opinion looks at that and says, okay, what do we read out of that? 3 festivals. Right? So they essentially look at the first half of that. Rabbi Shimon looks at the second half and says, okay, it lists the festivals in a particular order. Therefore, it has to be 3 festivals in that order.
With the specificity that Sukkot is being mentioned last, right? Because that's the reason it's being heard. Because it was mentioned last, it must mean that that's the last one, right?
And in addition, each time you appear, which is at each festival, you have to bring an offering.
Yeah. So
Right.
you've got these 3 times during the year. They're being weekly. You have a year to fulfill your vow. During that year, you're going to be in Jerusalem anyhow 3 times. So you may as well
Perfect
bring your
time.
offering
Right.
as long as you're there. Right? There's no excuse not to fulfill your vow since you're there 3 times.
So I want to make a distinction between the what you might give at the festival anyway and the vow in which we're talking. Right, those are not the same.
The vow would be in
Right, we're talking about I have made a vow.
I agree.
Right.
But it's not completely clear to me exactly what the distinction is.
So let's say
It's not exactly.
yeah.
I have
Let's
some idea, but
So let's say every time, this is a bad example, so bear with me. Every time I visit my parents, right, I bring them a bottle of wine. Right? Let's say that's what I do. Right? Every time I visit them 3 times a year, let's say, and every time I visit them, I bring a bottle of wine. Right? Before I leave, I say to them, you know what? I promise I'm going to bring you a bottle of champagne.
You didn't say when or
Right? But let's assume, right, that we fit the context of this, right?
The whole series of time goes by.
Right. So I have now, depending on who we ask, some amount of time before I have to bring them a bottle of champagne. Does that preclude the requirement for me to bring them wine?
You didn't
Right,
say
those are
instead-
very different.
but
You see what I
didn't
mean?
say Champagne instead of wine. You were not specific.
You guys are like the Gemara, right? This is perfect. But that's exactly, you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Right, so that I would say would be the distinction here, which is one is an obligation I might have anyway, and an additional obligation that I've brought on because I have made a vow of some
So
kind.
suppose you can't get there. So when you finally get there, maybe you bring them 3 bottles of wine and a bottle of champagne at the same time, fulfilling it because you missed a couple of visits.
So that would be the question, right? I'm not going to give you an answer, but that would be the question.
so a poor man might only be able to afford a bottle of non-negotiable wine. And a regular basis.
Non-Levitical wine, Brad sells for about $100. Non-Levitical.
Do they still have blue?
It's an example. It
That's a
doesn't
very
matter.
fancy
A
wine.
rich man might normally bring and feel obligated to bring a bottle of Mavushal wine each time.
Right.
So I'm not going to go all the way, but it's still not black and white. That line between the two is still gray. But yes, I see there's.
If you didn't promise a specific type of wine, then whatever you
Wait,
did before you do
so wait a
that-
second. No, so I think what I'm hearing. So what I'm hearing you say is really a conversation about what happens when I have more than one obligation running concurrent, of which, by the way, we have lots of all the time with lots of people and God and community, blah 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 blah, et cetera, right? The question is, right, how do I navigate my different obligations when they come due at the same time, or presumably around the same time, right? What happens when I have an obligation every festival, and I have an additional obligation that I've put on myself, right?
There's 1,000 people in line behind you waiting for you to finish up so they can get their turn.
Exactly. So we're going to stop there for today. We'll meet back in a couple of weeks. The first week we don't have a holiday on a Monday. I think that's the 7th or 8th of October. I won't be here. I won't be here that particular week. I'm at a conference with Rabbis Without Borders. So,
Can I give you my paper?
right. So if you want, yeah, you can have, unless you want to keep it. All right. So we'll end there. You can take all of them. Thank you, Howie, for doing that. And
we need to ask him if he's obligated and he decides in the next 20 years to leave Pittsburgh, will he?
Right, will he continue?
For 120
thank you,
years?
Facebook Live.